You walk into the relationship thinking it's about honesty, affection, maybe even equality. But within weeks, something shifts. You start adjusting your tone. You second-guess your words. You give more than you planned, and still, you feel like you're not doing enough. You assume it's your fault. You don't realize the game started the moment you met her. The rules, they were never spoken. She doesn't use force. She doesn't need to. Her weapons are subtle. Implication. Omission. The quiet weight of disappointment. You don't know why, but you want her to be pleased, not just happy pleased with you. You find yourself calibrating your behavior, trying to avoid some invisible threshold that once crossed brings withdrawal. She doesn't punish you outright. She just ... pulls away. That absence becomes your hell. This isn't a villain story. Most of the time, she doesn't even know she's doing it. That's what makes it more dangerous. These tactics are woven into her instinct, her biology, her emotional survival strategy. As Schopenhauer wrote, "We are not free to want what we want. You're not the only one under a spell." She's reacting to forces older than civilization. Jung would call this a projection field. You're not seeing her clearly. She's not seeing you clearly. You're both responding to something beneath the surface. Archetypes, wounds, evolutionary scripts. But make no mistake, while you may feel like the rational one, she holds the emotional lever. And that lever can move your entire life. You think this is love? But it's not yet. It's a negotiation. It's a quiet war of symbols and needs. She doesn't need to dominate you. She only needs to redirect your attention, your self-worth, your emotional labor. And if you're not aware, you'll give it willingly, grateful for her approval, terrified of her withdrawal. This is the beginning, not of a romance, but of a slow erosion of agency, of clarity, of power. And unless you learn to see the moves behind the smile, you'll confuse control for connection, affection for manipulation, softness for strategy. Ask yourself, when did you start orbiting her gravity? She doesn't demand anything outright that would break the illusion. Instead, she leans into a much older, more primal tool: helplessness. Not real helplessness, but the strategic performance of it. She sighs, hesitates, struggles just enough. She tilts her head, lowers her voice, asks you to explain again. And like clockwork, you step in. You offer fix, carry, solve. You don't even think it feels natural. You're a man after all. Isn't this what strength is for? Here's the trap. When you become the rescuer, she becomes the center. Her weakness makes you feel strong, which makes you emotionally invested, which makes you compliant. And the more you invest, the more she gains leverage. You give not out of generosity, but from a subconscious desire to maintain the illusion of your importance. This isn't malicious, it's biological. Evolution. Rewarded women who could inspire protection without resistance. Who could signal vulnerability just enough to provoke action, while maintaining ultimate control over what that action meant. In doing so, she bypasses logic entirely. She doesn't convince you, she triggers you, and when you later feel drained, unappreciated or confused, you won't blame her, because she didn't do anything. She never asked, never insisted. She merely allowed you to volunteer, and you did. Again and again, Jung called this the anima possession in men. The state where a man is unconsciously ruled by the idealized feminine within his psyche. You don't serve her, you serve what she awakens in you. The illusion that by saving her you become whole. But you don't become whole, you become depleted. Each time you solve her invisible crisis, you sacrifice another piece of discernment. You tell yourself she needs you, but what she really needs is your obedience. Why does this work so well? Because she doesn't look like a tyrant. She looks like someone who just can't do it. But underneath, you're not helping a woman, you're propping up a system. A dynamic that rewards learned helplessness and punishes boundaries. Until you stop reacting to her struggle as if it's a command, you'll keep playing your role. Not the man, but the servant of her self-narrative. You sense it, but you can't quite name it. The way she delays. The way her affection ebbs and flows like a tide governed by a hidden moon. Sometimes she's warm, inviting, electric. Other times distant, ambiguous. You're left replaying every interaction, wondering what shifted. Oh. You tell yourself you're being patient, respectful, but deep down, you're negotiating without terms, without clarity, without power. This is not about desire. It's about control. Sexual access is the most ancient currency of leverage. And in modern relationships, it's often the last card she doesn't have to explicitly play. She doesn't need to say no. She just needs to make you chase the maybe. And as long as the maybe is alive, she owns your focus. She doesn't realize she's doing it, not consciously, but her nervous system remembers. Millennia of female ancestors learned that selective desire was power. That control of the sexual threshold determined the quality of protection, provisioning, and prestige. The game was never seduction.
Nice.
It was filtration. How long can you keep him orbiting, guessing, sacrificing, and you play along? It's not because you're weak, but because you're wired. Evolution made your brain equate sexual proximity with personal validation. And now, her unpredictability becomes your obsession. Schopenhauer observed that sexuality is the will to life, hidden under the veil of romantic illusion. In that illusion, she becomes both gatekeeper and reward. Your worth feels contingent on access, and access is always just out of reach. But here's the twist. The longer she withholds, the more you invest. The more you invest, the more cognitive dissonance you feel. You can't admit you're being manipulated, so you double down. You become more accommodating, more patient, more emotionally exposed. And all the while, she hasn't had to demand anything. Her absence does the work. You think you're proving your love, but you're being trained, conditioned to see intimacy not as mutual expression, but as a prize, okay? A prize that justifies whatever self-erasure is required, until you sever the belief that sexual access equals validation. You are not a man in love. You're a man on a leash, held by a silence she doesn't even need to explain. It starts small. A delayed reply, a flat tone, smile that doesn't reach her eyes. You notice it, but you dismiss it. Maybe she's tired. Maybe she's just having a bad day. But then, it happens again. And again, not enough to call out, not enough to accuse, but just enough to sting. You've entered the training zone. Women don't need to raise their voice to discipline a man. They just need to remove warmth. When you behave in ways that please her, she rewards you attention, affection, softness. When you deviate, she withdraws. Not visibly, not loudly, but in a way that activates your nervous system. You feel the chill. You scramble to bring the warmth back. This is classical conditioning. The same way you train a dog, except that leash is invisible, and the trick is that you think you're free, but you're not acting from clarity. You're acting from emotional addiction. You've tied your internal equilibrium to her fluctuating approval. Jung understood this dynamic as the shadow dance, where one partner unconsciously manipulates the other into carrying their disowned emotions. When she's emotionally unavailable, it's not always personal. It's projection. She might be punishing a past betrayal, a father wound, a story she's never voiced, but you're the canvas. You absorb it. You adapt the problem. You think love means proving you can handle her moods. That if you stay patient enough, consistent enough, she'll trust you again. But you're not being tested. You're being programmed. And she may not even realize she's doing it. Emotional withholding is often reflexive, especially for women. Raised in cultures where direct confrontation is punished, but subtle control is rewarded. She doesn't fight, she freezes. And you interpret that freeze as your failure, but you're not failing. You're responding to a manipulation tactic disguised as mood. When your peace becomes dependent on her emotional availability, you've handed over sovereignty. You're no longer loving her, you're chasing her signal, hoping she light you up again. Ask yourself, would you notice if you were being trained like a pet? Because you are. And the treat isn't sex, it's relief. The reward is the return of her warmth. And you'll do almost anything to feel it again. She cries, trembles. She tells you she doesn't know how to cope. Her voice breaks. Her body collapses inward. You feel your chest tighten. Everything in you wants to fix it, soothe it, protect her from whatever pain she's carrying. And in that moment, You're no longer negotiating, you're submitting. This is weaponized vulnerability. Not in the cartoonish sense of faking emotion, but in the far more dangerous and unconscious form, using displays of distress to disarm your boundaries, to make refusal feel cruel, to make disagreement feel like abandonment. She's not pretending to hurt, but she has learned through family, media experience that her pain compels male obedience, that when she breaks down, the power dynamic flips. Suddenly, she's not the one who must justify her behavior. You must explain why you're being insensitive, why you're not doing more, why your boundary is hurting her. And so you compromise, you soften, you step over your own line just to stop the bleeding. And just like that, she gets what she wants without ever needing to argue. This is not conscious manipulation. It's somatic strategy. Her nervous system broadcasts distress, and yours responds with submission. Schopenhauer would call this the triumph of emotional impulse over rational will. Something feels off, but you feel compelled to comply. Biology wins. Jung would say she's projecting her inner child, the wounded girl who never felt safe, so into the relationship, and you, unaware, accept the role of savior. You mistake trauma for truth. You confuse her need for containment with your duty to rescue. But here's the cost. Over time, your boundaries dissolve. You stop saying no. You start anticipating her fragility. You become hypervigilant, always trying to prevent the next collapse. And soon, you're not a man anymore. You're an emotional caretaker, a butler for her wounds. You're not building intimacy. You're absorbing volatility. And the worst part, you start to doubt your own anger, your own clarity. You suppress your truth to keep her stable. Ask yourself, is her breakdown the beginning of healing or the end of your autonomy? Because once vulnerability becomes a tactic, truth becomes impossible. And without truth, love is a hostage situation wrapped in empathy. She never says you're a bad man. She doesn't need to. She just tilts the story. She recounts your argument to her friends, but in her tone, not her words. She becomes the victim. She mentions your distance at dinner, but only after a pause with a sigh and the carefully chosen phrase, I don't know, maybe he's just been really stressed lately. Suddenly, you're the unstable one, the cold one. It's the problem. This is social sabotage in its most evolved form. It's not slander. It's not lies. Framing, women understand. Instinctively, what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social expectations. But while you work to protect yours, she works to shape hers through you. By curating how others see your relationship, she gains leverage without confrontation. If you stand up to her, you look aggressive. If you defend yourself, you seem defensive. You're already framed, and she doesn't even need to speak directly. A glance, a non-response. That's just how he is. Her social intuition is fine-tuned. She knows how to enlist allies without asking. The tribe turns before you notice. You feel the shift. Cold shoulders, concerned looks, friends who suddenly hope everything's okay. Now, if you try to assert boundaries, you're doing it against a silent jury. And that jury is biased because they're seeing only what she allows them to see. You're no longer in a relationship with one woman. You're in a courtroom built from whispers, half-truths, and unspoken judgments. Schopenhauer warned that reputation is a fragile illusion sustained by the ignorance of others, and in the feminine domain, that illusion is currency. If she controls the narrative, she controls your reality. Not by silencing you, but by making your voice sound untrustworthy. You wonder why you feel trapped. It's because leaving now makes you look like the villain. Because she positioned herself as the one holding it together, the patient one, the misunderstood one. And so you stay not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone in your truth. But here's the truth. If your story depends on her silence, it will never be heard. And if her story depends on your distortion, it was never loved to begin with. She doesn't just attract you, she activates you. Something about her feels mythic-like. You've known her before. She doesn't even need to say much. Her eyes, her energy, the way she laughs at the exact right moment, it feels like destiny. But it's not destiny. It's projection. You're not falling in love with her. You're falling in love with the archetype she embodies. Jung called it the anima, the unconscious image of the feminine that lives inside every man. It's not rational. It's not chosen. It's shaped by every story, every wound, every absence in your emotional history. And when a woman reflects just enough of it back at you, she becomes irresistible. This is the anima hook. She doesn't consciously set it. She simply is, and your psyche does the rest. You project your longing onto her, your need to be understood, to be healed, to be completed. And as long as she reflects that image, she becomes sacred. But what happens when she changes? When her behavior doesn't match the fantasy, you don't adjust your perception, you double down. You try harder, you cling to the image. And in doing so, you hand her the power to define your emotional landscape. She doesn't need to manipulate you directly. Your own psyche does the manipulation for her. You hear her criticism as truth. You take her withdrawal as a signal to improve. You see her affection as salvation. She becomes your mirror, and you forget how to see yourself without her reflection. That's the tragedy of the anima projection. It feels like intimacy, but it's really captivity. Not your soulmate, she's your symbol. And as long as you mistake the symbol for the woman, you'll surrender your agency to her emotional weather. Schopenhauer might say that love is nature's trick to ensure reproduction, disguised as transcendence. But Jung goes deeper. Projection is the enemy of individuation. You cannot become yourself while chasing your lost feminine in another. You say you love her. But ask yourself, do you even know her? Or do you only know the version of her that heals your internal myth? If she's your mirror, then who are you without her gaze? You think you're choosing her? But look closer. You're just circling a script. You meet her, feel a pull, experience the same old high, and then it begins. The confusion, the emotional volatility, the push and pull. And somehow you stay. You rationalize. You adapt. You suffer. Again, this is not love. It's a projection. Loop a cycle where both of you are reacting to wounds instead of reality. She projects her unmet needs onto you. Validation, containment, rescue. You project your unresolved longing onto her. Approval, feminine softness, maternal safety. And together you act out an unconscious contract neither of you remembers signing. The loop tightens every time you ignore your gut to keep the peace. Every time she withholds love and you interpret it as your failure. Over time, you become compliant, not because she demands it, but because you've been trained to avoid rupture. This is learned helplessness. You once had boundaries, but they got punished subtly, consistently. Your anger made her cry. Your detachment made her cold. Your truth made her disappear. So you stopped asserting. You started guessing. You became emotionally domesticated. She might feel the same. Her defensiveness may not be strategy, it may be trauma. Her moods may not be manipulation. They may be survival. But none of that excuses the dynamic. And none of that saves you from its cost, Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious. It will rule your life, and you will call it fate. You think this is just how relationships go? You think your suffering proves your devotion? God. Really, it just proves how deeply you've been captured by an internal script. You didn't fall in love. You fell into familiarity. And because the pain feels known, it feels safe. That's the paradox. The worse it gets, the more attached you become. Because detachment now feels like death, like betrayal, like failure. Schopenhauer might say, your will is not free, is chained to impulses you haven't yet mastered. Until you see that, you will mistake your own suffering for nobility. Ask yourself, when did you stop asking what you want? When did her moods become your compass? You're not with her. You're with your own unresolved psychology. And every day you stay, you reinforce the loop. There's a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when her voice softens in just the right way. When she looks at you not with seduction, but with knowing. Like she sees through you. like she accepts. The little boy inside the man. And in that instant, you're not her partner, you're her son, her subject, her possession. This is the mother wound trigger. It's not about incest or perversion. It's about psychology. It's about the deepest, most buried longing a man carries, the craving to be fully seen and unconditionally held, not by a lover. By the archetypal mother, the feminine force that nurtures, soothes, completes. Jung wrote extensively about the mother archetype and its capacity to possess the male psyche. If your own mother was cold, critical, inconsistent, or overly enmeshed, you learn to seek safety and surrender. You learn to earn love by pleasing, fixing, sacrificing. And now, decades later, you find a woman who activates that same wound in. You call it fate, but it's not fate, it's reenactment. She senses it too often without awareness. She picks up on your hunger for approval, your eagerness to be good, your subtle shame. And even if she doesn't mean to, she exploits it, not by yelling, but by nurturing selectively. She becomes warm when you comply, withdrawn when you resist. She rewards the boy, she punishes the man, and you, terrified of abandonment, travert to obedience. You become emotionally servile, trading truth for proximity. You stop leading, you start managing. You forget how to assert, how to want, how to challenge her, because the moment you do, the illusion of safety shatters. And you feel again like that small boy, unloved. Schopenhauer called maternal love the most selfless because it exists to ensure survival. But romantic love infected by the mother wound is the opposite. It becomes transactional, volatile, addictive. You mistake her control for care, her monitoring for intimacy, her smothering for love. And she, caught in her own projections, may not realize she's reinforcing your dependence. But the outcome is the same. You are not her equal. You are her project, her emotional son. And as long as that dynamic rules you, you will never become sovereign. Ask yourself, are you being loved or managed? Because the man she controls can never truly lead. And the man still chasing his mother will never truly be free. There comes a moment, not dramatic, not explosive, when the veil lifts. You're sitting across from her, maybe mid-conversation, maybe in silence, and something hits you. You're not choosing this. You're surviving it. You're not in love. You're in a pattern. One that rewards your silence, erodes your spine, and calls it intimacy. That's the wake-up slap, not given by her but by reality. You begin to see every compromise for what it was, a surrender, every yes that meant no. Every retreat that looked like peacekeeping but felt like erosion. And you realize you've been complicit not because you're weak, but because you were asleep. It's not about blaming her. It never was. She's acting from her own psychology, her own scars, her own unconscious mastery of influence. But now you see it. You see how her tears rewrote your convictions, how her silence rewired your needs, how her subtle corrections reshaped your personality. You ask yourself, who was I before her? That's when you realize she didn't steal. Your power, you gave it, piece by piece, sacrifice by silence. And the question now isn't whether she manipulated you, but whether you're ready to reclaim yourself. Jung would say this is the beginning of individuation, the moment you stop projecting and start owning. You stop blaming women for their tactics and start mastering your own psychology. You see her not as an enemy, but as a mirror showing you where you lack sovereignty. Schopenhauer would say, suffering opens the door to truth, and here it is. Cold, unsparing, liberating. Because once you see the game, you can never unsee it. You recognize the cues, the traps, the soft coercions wrapped in affection. And more importantly, you recognize your own patterns, the way you bend, beg, betray yourself to avoid rejection. But now, you have a choice. You can step back into the loop, or you can break it by stepping fully into clarity, into presence, into power, because the man who sees clearly can no longer be controlled. This isn't about condemning women. It's about confronting the invisible scripts that govern your life. You are not here to serve projections. You are here to become conscious, to see manipulation not as evil, but as inevitable unless countered by awareness. You reclaim your sovereignty not by domination, but by refusing to abandon your truth. Individuation means seeing through the illusion of romance, of rescue, of weakness disguised as warmth. You do not owe anyone your silence. Do not need to earn affection through obedience. Your power is not in reaction, but in reflection. Now you know the game. The question is, will you keep playing it or rewrite the rules? If this opened your eyes even a little, then you already feel the urgency. Share this message. Comment with your experience. I get to disrupt the algorithm of unconsciousness. The truth only spreads when men choose to face it. Don't stay in the loop. Break it in. Help others do the same.